Congressman Larson, thank you so much for speaking with Voice of America.
It's my pleasure. It's a great service to the country, VOA is, and I'm glad to be part of this.
Thank you. Congressman Larson, you are the co-chair of the U.S.-China Working Group, which you co-founded in 2005. What is the purpose and what is its top priorities at the moment?
Well, the purpose of the U.S.-China Working Group was to create a space in the U.S. House of Representatives for members of the House to talk about the various relationships that the U.S. and China have, to educate ourselves on those issues and those relationships, and then, when appropriate, to offer suggestions. Top priorities this year are to both understand the U.S. administration's policies towards China, which are slightly different than previous administrations, as well as educate ourselves on the new 19th Party Congress that's taking place in China and what that might mean, what change in leadership or the consistency of leadership might mean for Chinese policy towards the United States.
What have you learned about the 19th Party Congress so far?
That is happening. It's going to happen. It's likely that Xi Jinping will continue as president. And I think the most important thing about the 19th Party Congress, well, there's really going to be two things. One is, what does the leadership team, that leadership slate look like after Xi Jinping? The next 4, the next 6 people. And then second, will the result of the 19th Party Congress provide President Xi an opportunity to either continue what he's doing or to change course? Most prominently, probably discussed is changing course a little bit more on the Chinese economy. Will he feel free to open up the economy a little bit more to foreign investment?
You represent Washington's 2nd Congressional District. Yeah. How has trading with China benefited the local economy, and what are some of the top concerns your constituents have by trading with China?
Yeah, certainly trade with China tends to be a double-edged sword. Washington State has the strongest trade relationship of almost any state in the country with China. That's largely driven by the manufacturing and sale of airplanes at the Boeing company. In fact, they say if there is a trade war, one study showed that if there's a trade war with China, Washington State would get hurt most, and Snohomish County, the county that I represent, would be hurt most from a trade war. So again, it can be a double-edged sword. Trade creates jobs. There's a lot of people working, not just building airplanes, but doing a lot of different things. Creating jobs in my state, making things that are sold into China. That's a good thing. The flip side is if the trade relationship goes awry, or goes poorly, it can have an equally devastating impact on jobs in Washington State.
Job creation is one of the most important issues for American workers. And as we know, many believe that U.S. and Chinese workers are not competing on a level playing field. And that's why some of President Trump's rhetoric resonate with some of the American workers.
Yeah.
How can we change the dynamic of U.S.-China trade relations to help create more jobs for American workers?
Well, first off, I think it's important to look at whether or not what the president says is true or has some truth to it. I think that the issue of a level playing field is important. I think generally, if you were to look at the ability for U.S. companies to invest into China without having a Chinese partner, compared to a Chinese company investing in the United States, the playing field isn't level. It isn't level at all. But I also think that U.S. investment into China largely these days is done in order to get into the Chinese market. It's not to build things in China and then export them back to the United States. It's to build things in China and sell them in China. It's largely the story of U.S. investment now in China. But I do think a level playing field is important, but a lot of what needs to be done is what we can do here in the United States. Are we doing the right things, investing in our own roads and bridges and highways, the infrastructure? Are we doing our best to invest in the skills of the workers so that they can remain flexible and competitive in a very competitive global environment? And then finally, I think that it's important, and where I agree with the president, is trade enforcement. It doesn't do a lot of good to have rules of trade if you don't enforce those rules of trade. And so taking some targeted trade enforcement actions that we can back up to show our seriousness about the importance of playing by the rules is important. That the U.S. plays by the rules, that China plays by the rules. So trade enforcement, I think, is a pretty critical aspect of showing American workers that we're both serious about trade with China, because it does creates jobs, but we're also serious about China playing by the rules that everyone else agrees to.
China seems to be on a buying spree of U.S. companies in recent years. According to economic analysis, last year, big Chinese companies snatched up $45 billion worth of U.S. companies. How do you see this trend? Is it a good thing, a bad thing, or somewhere in between?
Probably somewhere in between. The truth of it, in my view, I would say that the flow of capital, the ability to invest in countries, is important. It is critical to ensure that capital is going to the place where it can most efficiently be used. The reasoning behind that investment is important, though, as well. Right now, there's in China the desire for Chinese companies to move their money out of China for reasons of the Chinese economy. It's overheated. They don't want to be in a bubble, in an economic bubble, an investment bubble, so they're trying to move their money to a safer place. That certainly can benefit the United States, but unless that money is being moved in purchasing companies to improve those companies, as opposed to just park the money, that might be a good investment for the investor, but may not result in a best outcome for the company they purchase or the workers there. So there's that side of it. The flip side is that it really underscores the unlevel playing field that exists between the two countries, the ability to invest in each other's countries, to purchase companies in each other's countries. That is still a very unlevel playing field. The third point I'd make on this issue of investment, however, is that Chinese investment in the United States is starting from a very low base. So it can in fact look like there is a lot of Chinese investment coming in the United States. Anything relative to zero looks like a lot. Now, it hasn't been zero in the past, but it has grown exponentially in large part because it's been so little in the past. So I think you have to put some perspective around it as well.
Many are particularly concerned about when Chinese companies buying Hollywood or technology companies. Do you think there should be more scrutiny when Chinese companies purchase U.S. companies, especially when some of these companies have direct link to Beijing? Do you think the current review process is enough?
I think the current review process is very aggressive. We've seen very recently a decision by the president upon a recommendation of the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., or the CFIUS committee. We've seen the president take that recommendation to turn down an investment in the United States. So that process does work, but that's pretty rare when that happens. For the most part, Chinese investment in the United States does occur. But I think on the technology side, it's much more sensitive than than on the entertainment side. Chinese companies investing into Hollywood or investing into theaters. American theatergoers, moviegoers, will see almost anything, but they won't go see really terrible movies. And so if you want to make, if Chinese companies want to buy into Hollywood and make really bad movies, they're going to lose a lot of money pretty fast.
On North Korea, you are the senior member of House Armed Service Committee, and now the tension runs high. What do you think the U.S. can do to pressure China to do more on North Korea?
Well, I don't think it's really just a matter of the U.S. pressuring China. I think it's a matter of the United States trying to find a way for China to participate in pressuring North Korea. The pressure campaign is an important one that this administration is undertaking, and the pressure is on North Korea, not on China. I think the United States can do a better job of trying to demonstrate to the Chinese leadership why it's in the Chinese government's and the Chinese people's interests to pressure North Korea. We don't want China, that is, the United States doesn't want, the Chinese doesn't want a nuclearized peninsula. But that's where it's headed, and that's not in the U.S. interests, and by China's own words, is not in Chinese interests. So I think it's less of a matter of pressuring China than it is a matter of demonstrating to China what is, at least how we see, how it might impact its own Chinese interests for North Korea to continue on its current path.
President Trump is scheduled to visit China in November. What is your expectation of his visit?
I honestly have very low expectations of the visit. I think it will go well. I don't think it will go poorly. But the administration has really settled on kind of two issues in its relationship with China. One is North Korea, working with Chinese, with the UN, and as well directly bilaterally with the Chinese to try to continue a pressure campaign on North Korea. And the other is on trade. But it's not a trade from a broader trade perspective. It's trade from individual complaints or individual issues that the U.S. has with China. So I think, honestly, we're not taking a very broad strategic relationship view of the U.S.-China relationship under this administration. I think that's to our detriment. I think that favors the Chinese desire for that approach. So I'd like to see that aperture, if you will, widen to include many other issues, climate change as a for instance, cultural exchanges as a for instance. But presidents get to decide how they want to approach foreign policy, and Congress can provide advice and do some other things. But I think because the issues are so narrowly defined, big issues as they are, narrowly defined, that my expectations for outcomes are not all that great.
Lastly, what is your message to our audience in China? What is your hope for U.S.-China relations going forward?
Well, my hope for your U.S.-China relations going forward is that despite some ups and downs in the relationship since the opening up, largely the relationship has gone up. It hasn't been a consistent trajectory up, but over time, we're at a better place than we were in the past. And I want to see that continue. I think it's a positive for the U.S. people to do that. I think it's a positive for the Chinese people, for the relationship to continue to increase. I think it's one that's going to be based on mutual trust and mutual respect. I don't think, though, that we should necessarily forget that we have differences. Every country has differences with each other. The U.S.-China differences shouldn't be swept under the rug. We should embrace them and try to work through them, while also understanding that we have things that we need to work together on in our own interests. So I think it's good, and it